The ZACK Files. ZAP. I'm a Mind Reader. By Dan Greenberg. Illustrated by Jack E. Davis. Chapter 1. Have you ever wished you could read people's minds? Tune into their heads and hear exactly what they're thinking? Well, forget it. You wouldn't like it. I know. I did it. And it wasn't a big treat at all. Believe me. I guess I should begin at the beginning. My name is ZACK. I'm 10 years old. I live in New York City. And I'm in the 5th grade at the Horace Hyde-White School for Boys. Ever since I was young, I've been interested in weird stuff. I don't think I'm weird myself. But I keep wishing that aliens would invite me onto their spaceship. Or that I could float out of my body and travel far away without stopping at gas station restrooms, which are always pretty gross. Science is probably my favorite subject. It teaches you stuff that is at least as weird as reading minds. For example, do you know what a tachyon is? A tachyon is one of the tiniest things in the universe. Tinier than an atom even. And it travels faster than the speed of light. A tachyon travels so fast, it gets where it's going before it starts out. If you were a tachyon, you'd never be late to school. You'd get there before you left home. I learned that in science class. The time I want to tell you about happened in science class. Mrs. Coleman-Levin is my science teacher. She's also my homeroom teacher. She's kind of weird, but not in a bad way. For one thing, she always wears work boots. Even in summer. Even at dress-up parties at school in the evening. For another thing, she works weekends at the morgue. She does autopsies. That means cutting up dead people to see what they died of gross. But interesting. Our classroom has a lot of weird, interesting stuff in it. There's a complete human skeleton hanging in the corner. Not a plastic model either. It's a real one. On her desk, Mrs. Coleman-Levin keeps a glass jar with a pig brain in it. And we have lots of class pets. But not the cute, furry kind. We have a piranha fish and a tarantula and a snake. The piranha eats goldfish. The snake eats mice, which is kind of gross. Mrs. Coleman-Levin feeds them when we're not around. I don't think it bothers her at all. On the day I want to tell you about, Mrs. Coleman-Levin was helping us do an experiment. It was with small electric motors. I was hooking one up. By accident, one of the wires fell into a beaker of water. Without thinking, I reached in and pulled it out. Suddenly my hand got all tingly. I felt as if sparks were shooting out of me. ZACK! Mrs. Coleman-Levin came rushing over to me. Are you all right? Sure. Sort of, I said. I really couldn't tell at that point, if you want to know the truth. I was too busy watching the little fireworks that were going off pop. Pop right in front of my eyes. Then I totally blacked out. Chapter 2. How are you feeling, dear? Said a strange, echoey voice. It was the school nurse, Mrs. Crump. Her voice doesn't usually echo. Fine, thanks, I said. I always answer. Fine, thanks, even when I'm not. I've found that when people ask you how you are, they don't really want to know. They only want you to say you're fine so they can get on to the next thing. By the way, I said, why am I here? Don't you remember? Said Mrs. Crump in her echoey voice. Sure. Sort of, I said. But tell me anyway. Well, you got an electric shock in science class, she said. You put your hand in a beaker of water that had live wires in it. It knocked you out. Oh, right, I said. I remember that. And then a strange thing happened. Although her lips didn't move, I thought I heard Mrs. Crump say, "Stupid klutz. You're lucky you didn't electrocute yourself." "Excuse me?" I said. "What?" said Mrs. Crump. "You just called me a stupid klutz." Mrs. Crump's face turned bright red. "I said no such thing," she replied. And then, although her lips weren't moving at all, I heard her say, must have been muttering under my breath, "Better watch it." I don't know how she did it. Maybe she was a ventriloquist. "How did you do that?" I asked. "How did I do what?" "Say what you just said without moving your lips." Mrs. Crump frowned. She gave me a funny look. She made me lie down for 15 minutes. She stuck a thermometer in my mouth. Then she said, "Zack, you do not have any fever. And you don't seem to be badly hurt. Would you like to go on to your next class?" "Okay," I said. If I had remembered what my next class was, I probably wouldn't have said okay. Chapter 3. My next class was geography. I like geography a lot. But we were having this big test that day. And I forgot to take my geography book home with me to study. So I was pretty much out of luck. Our geography teacher, Mr. Snodgrass, passed out sheets with the test questions. I took a look at mine and started feeling dizzy. The first question was, name the 2 biggest rivers in Iraq. My heart sank like a stone. I didn't have a clue. I wasn't even sure what continent Iraq was in. Then suddenly a picture popped into my head. I had no idea where it came from. It was of a mother tiger with her cubs. And a bunch of kids were nearby, looking scared. The cubs kept yelling, "Euphrates," at the kids. What the heck did that have to do with rivers in Iraq? Then I heard a voice inside my head. It said, Tigris and Euphrates. That was it. The 2 biggest rivers in Iraq were the Tigris and the Euphrates. But how did I remember it? I quickly wrote down the answers. I looked at the second question. What is the tallest mountain in the world? I was about to skip it. But then the answer popped inside my head again. Just like the last time. Mount Everest. Wow. I was feeling great. I knew more than I thought I did. I went on to the next question. List the continents of the world in order of size. Oh, boy. I stopped feeling so smart. I knew Asia was pretty darn big. And I knew that North America and South America were continents. But was Australia a continent, or a really big island? And I didn't have to think any further. The voice in my head said, let's see, Asia, Africa, North America, South America, Antarctica, Europe, and Australia. At that exact moment I heard a snapping sound next to me. And the voice inside my mind said, darn pencil. I turned around to see Spencer Sharp. He was holding a pencil with a broken point. Spencer is the smartest kid in our class. He does math in his head that I can barely do on a calculator. Zack, called out Mr. Snodgrass. Eyes on our own papers, please. Sorry, I said. I sat back in my chair and gulped. The voice in my head belonged to Spencer. I hadn't remembered all those answers. I'd heard Spencer the way I'd heard Mrs. Crump. And now I knew what was going on. It all had started with that electric shock I got. Holy guacamole! I could read people's minds. This meant I'd been getting the test answers from Spencer Sharp. Not by looking at his paper, but by looking at his mind. Question: is reading somebody's mind cheating? I wasn't too sure about that. But just to be on the safe side, I decided not to listen anymore. I tried humming. And I did my best to finish the rest of the test by myself. During a question on oceans, I hummed a Beach Boys song. It was one my dad likes called Catch a Wave. Still, I couldn't quite drown out the sound of Spencer's answers. Somebody appears to be humming, said Mr. Snodgrass. Zack, is that you? Possibly, I said. Well, then, please be silent. Yes, sir, I said. For a question about rainforests, I hummed a song we used to sing in day camp. John Jacob Jingleheimer Schmidt. Zack! Mr. Snodgrass called out. If you don't stop humming, you're going to have to give me your test paper now and leave the room. I'm sorry, sir, I said. I won't do it anymore. I tried to hum only in my head. But for the rest of the class, Spencer's thoughts kept bleeding through my humming. Okay, time is up, said Mr. Snodgrass. I was pretty sure I had gotten an A. But I felt funny about it. I saw that this mind-reading stuff could be trouble. Just how much trouble, I was about to find out. Chapter 4. School was almost over. I went into my classroom to get my book bag. Mrs. Coleman-Levin was at her desk with the pig's brain on it. She had no idea I could read minds. I looked around the room at the other guys in the class. None of them knew my powers. As I turned my head, it was like tuning the knob on a radio. Little bits of what the kids were thinking came to me, separated by static. I can't believe how much homework I have. That pizza I had for lunch is still stuck in my stomach. I couldn't tell who was thinking these things. But I knew it was all coming from kids in the room. The door opened, and Floyd Hogmeister, the janitor, came in. The kids in my class are kind of scared of him. You know how they say some people have eyes in the back of their heads? Well, that's Mr. Hogmeister. He doesn't miss a thing, especially if a kid is doing something he shouldn't. I heard you had some trouble with an outlet, he said to Mrs. Coleman-Levin. Yes, Floyd, she said. Zack must have shorted it out earlier in the day when he got an electric shock. I think you might need to replace it. Pill have a look-see, he said. The janitor went to check the outlet that blew up when I got electrocuted. While he was doing that, I scanned the room. I was trying to pick up more bits and pieces of what people were thinking. Mom said not to eat too much candy after school. Is a pound too much? I'm going to get an F on that geography test. And Dad's going to go crazy. Kill. Kill today? Kill now? No. Kill tomorrow. Whoa. What was this? Did I hear right? I jiggled my head. Then I scanned the room again. If I ask Spencer over, maybe he'll let me copy his homework. Is today the 8th day I've worn this underwear, or only the 7th? Tomorrow for sure I'll put on clean ones. I love to kill. Can't kill now. Wait till tomorrow, kill tomorrow. There it was again. Who was thinking this? I finished stuffing my books into my book bag. Then I looked around the room. I tried to act cool about it. But those thoughts sounded like somebody was plotting a murder. Could that be? Was one of the 20 kids in our class a crazy psycho killer? No, I knew these guys. They might do stupid things, or even gross stuff. But kill somebody? No way. Then my eyes came to rest on the janitor, Mr. Hogmeister. He sure was creepy. But a murderer? Had no idea whose thoughts I was picking up. But I was worried. I thought I better check this out with my teacher. I went up to Mrs. Coleman-Levin's desk. She was marking some papers, frowning. Could I speak to you a moment, Mrs. Coleman-Levin? I asked. She didn't look up from her pile of papers. I'm pretty busy now, ZACK, she said. I'm sorry, I said. It's kind of important. She let out this really big sigh. Mrs. Coleman-Levin is not what you'd call a warm, fuzzy type. Okay, shoot, she said. I looked around. A lot of the kids were staring at me. So was Mr. Hogmeister. His eyes fastened onto me like he was reading my mind. And I swear I heard him say, "This is the kid who shorted out the outlet. Little troublemaker. I'd better watch him." I smiled weakly at Mr. Hogmeister. Then I turned back to Mrs. Coleman-Levin. Perhaps I could speak to you outside? I said. Outside? Why outside? Because what I have to say is private, I said. Okay, she said. Follow me. She clomped outside the classroom in her work boots. I followed her into the hall. What is it, ZACK? First, can I ask you a personal question, Mrs. Coleman-Levin? Depends what it is, she said. Do you believe in ESP? I don't know, she said. I am a scientist. So I have an open mind. It's possible such things exist. Why do you ask? Because I think today I learned how to read minds, I said. I see was all she said. I've been listening to the thoughts of people in the classroom, I told her. And I know this will sound unbelievable, but I think one of them is plotting a murder. Tomorrow! Mrs. Coleman-Levin looked at me very seriously. You're telling me you read the mind of a murderer? She said. I nodded. Then she took my hand and patted it. That is not like Mrs. Coleman-Levin at all. From somewhere inside my head I heard. This kid is Looney Tunes. Crazy as a bedbug. I'm glad you told me this, ZACK, she said. She was giving me this really sincere smile. Tomorrow, let's keep our eyes and ears open. Maybe together we can discover who it is and stop him before he kills. Sure, I said. Mrs.